Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning into AMTV Alternative Media Television. It is April 14th, 2015. Hope you guys enjoyed yesterday's video. I hope it provided some comic relief to the insanity that we're currently living. This idea that electing another person who's part of the same oligarchy as came before her is going to change American politics today. Of course, a vote for Hillary Clinton is just a vote and a continuation of a third term of the current president, Barack Obama. And anybody paying attention or that understands how America operates today would understand that the people really don't have a vote. It is entirely an illusion, just like the money system is, just like the Federal Reserve has created this illusion out of thin air. It continues to print money into infinity, bloat the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve at $4.5 trillion and 18 trillion plus national debt, keep interest rates at zero, and to continue these policies, a continuation of QE in America, in Europe, in Japan. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's a total lie. Perusing a couple articles this morning, and I read an interesting comment. It said, "Help, I've lost me bubbles." This is an article referencing the current bond market bubble and the bubble in the stock market. QE to infinity started in 2008, but now I'm writing to you in 2015 telling you to quit cold turkey. Next, I'm telling you to ignore the other parties going on in Europe, Japan, and China, where they have copied the model of US QE. Next, I'm going to tell you a little story about losing all your money relating to 1999 and 2009. However, the difference in those times were actual based on some semblance of an economic society in which the Fed didn't backstop. A stock exchange where 10% reduction never created a pause in the market. An era where a market had created some growth on its own, vice made out of forced excess. These bubbles occurred because of the Fed, but today's bubble is not going to end soon. The powers across the globe will not let a decline happen. So the bubble is really going to get big, bigger than anything the world has ever witnessed, and go on longer than others. Keep investing. This party is far from over. And I upvoted that comment because I actually agree with it. The bubble is very scary right now. The bubble in the bond market is terrifying. The bubble in the US equity market, the stock market, is terrifying. I mean, just pull a chart, track QE. Every time there's been a meaningful correction, they've launched another round of QE. And it's basically been a parabolic move since the 2008 and 2009 financial collapse. And if you look at the chart and you pull this for yourself, just look at the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average over the last 10 years or longer, you'll see at some point we're going to revert back to the mean, just like we reverted back to the mean in 2008 and 2009, and we had a crash. The same thing's going to happen again. But what's crazy about this is how big the bubble is actually being blown. And I agree with this comment. I think that the bubble is going to even get much, much bigger than what we are currently seeing now. It's going to get to the point where it'll be worse than pre-crash 1929, where the elevator man that you'd ride up to your tower, there's stories of this during the Great Depression, pre the Great Depression and the 1929 stock market crash. And that era that your taxi driver was telling you how to invest, that the man that worked the elevator was telling you how to invest, and that the stock market could never go down again. Well, we're going to get that reversion to the mean, but I think the bubble is blown even bigger, bolder. It's going to get even crazier, and you're going to hear chatter on the streets about how people are becoming wealthy in the U.S. stock market today. And it's interesting, you know, I talked about this a couple of months ago. I thought that there was very serious opportunity. It's not that it's all negative, you know, that there's not opportunity and there's not money to be made in this Ponzi scheme, which is really what it is, and that you shouldn't take steps to try to grow your wealth or to save for your future, to protect you and your family. And one of those areas that I cited was the energy market. The fact that oil prices have been artificially manipulated lower as a political move employed by the West and her counterparts and our allies like Saudi Arabia, which refused to cut production, to basically put pressure on enemies of the United States, namely Russia and China. And I argued that valuations were extremely low in the energy sector, and that you could look at companies like Rig, the offshore drillers, You could look at companies like Seadrill, an offshore driller. You could look at larger companies like ExxonMobil that pay a solid dividend. You could look at really the energy sector as a whole. You could buy an ETF, and it was a very good opportunity at the time, and I would argue still is, because it was the only segment of the market that had been severely hit. It was really the only part of the market, and still is today, that you could argue had some solid valuation metrics behind it. Now, since that time, the energy market has performed, it's up 6.5% this month alone. It double the nearest best performing sector, which happens to be healthcare. Some of these stocks have rallied 25% since we last spoke. So a lot of opportunity in these areas. There's bright spots in the weakness. And again, I talk about this all the time. It's not that there's not good investments out there. It's not that there's not bright spots in things like energy, for example, or technology, long-term bright spots. But it's a system itself structurally that is the problem. It's the bubble that's the problem. It's the Federal Reserve that's the problem. It's this system that is the problem. You know, people have been arguing with me over the past couple of days. I've done a few videos on Rand Paul, why I think that he's the best option compared to the other dirty pieces of laundry in the mix. Not that I think voting's necessarily going to change anything, but at least it's a better option, and it's a counterpoint to Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush or the same old tune. You know, people will say things like, Christopher, what we really need is a revolution. And I agree with you. I think that's exactly what we need. But, you know, we can still have a revolution with Rand Paul as president of the United States. Things would be a little bit better, even if they're just a tad bit better with Rand Paul as president of the United States. We can still have that revolution everybody's hoping for, everybody's waiting for, everybody's motivated to see. But why not also try to change things in the interim and work within the system a little bit? I mean, hey, that's exactly what the president of the United States, Barack Obama, has done. He's a Manchurian candidate. He basically got a haircut, stopped smoking his doobies, which he has, you know, famous pictures of smoking cigarettes, and I'm sure marijuana, etc. Put on a nice fancy suit and tie, got himself into office, had the right people put him into office, represented the right corporate interests, and now he's radicalized America. He's created this socialized surveillance state that we have today, of welfare programs, of legalizing illegals, surveilling the American people and the American public illegally, anti-constitutionally, fighting these wars overseas anti-constitutionally without the approval of Congress, starting new wars in the Middle East and places like Syria, continuing the old in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, maybe Rand Paul's smarter than we think. Maybe he's doing the same thing, but with a libertarian edge. And again, we can still have that revolution that we've all been waiting for. But we might as well have somebody else in power while it happens, and we'd be much better off in that position. So to me, honestly, this is extremely scary. Yeah, valuation-wise, the stock market's extremely scary. The bond market, extremely scary. I think that the bond bubble might even be the more obvious bubble, even though it's less obvious to the general public, because the general public doesn't really understand fixed income. They don't understand the credit markets. They don't understand interest rates. Just basic economic class 101. I think that the bond market is actually most scary. I think that that's where we could see the supposed flash crash, where we could see a run on the dollar at some point in the future, where the dollar loses 20, 30, 40, 50% of its value overnight. And there's a panic, and that would, of course, have a ripple effect in the equity market. It would have a ripple effect in global equities, stocks, and bonds. And of course, we're seeing all of this. I've reported on this extensively with the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is a counterpoint and is a direct competitor of the Western-backed World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So we're seeing country after country jump on board, oppose the West, directly oppose the United States, and really establish this new world order system, this new currency system, this new system of debt. I mean, make no mistake about it, there's a reason why the IMF has chosen to loan out billions of dollars to Ukraine post their Western-backed intelligence coup. and revolution so that the United States and Western allies can indebt Ukraine to the IMF and the World Bank, of which they control. But you see, with the AIIB and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, suddenly all of this changes and puts power into the hands of the East and the enemies of the United States, Russia, China, India, European countries, the United Kingdom, which is now on board, Italy, allies of the United States on board. In fact, the only one really, and the only country really not on board with the AIIB, the competitor to the World Bank and the IMF, is the United States, which has been urging country after country not to jump ship, even though they have. So they're already establishing the New World Order. They're already preparing for the collapse. They're preparing for the collapse of the dollar. They're preparing for this consequential systemic shock that'll be worse than 2008 and 2009. And I know people laugh about it. I laugh about it, myself included. We've been talking about this for a long time, but it will happen. There will be a reversion to the mean. There has to be. There always is a reversion to the mean. But I actually think the bubble, just as this person pointed out in their comment, will grow much, much bigger, much more out of control. We'll see greater and even loftier valuations that will make no sense. And we'll see really an inversion of the mean for much, much longer. And expect it to get scarier, expect it to get bolder, more confusing, crazier. It's why we're seeing these moves in the currency market, for example. These huge moves that we haven't seen in 20 years, 50 years, maybe ever, as a result of Federal Reserve intervention and Federal Reserve policy. And that really is the heart of the problem. Again, I go back to the structural problems, the problems with the system. It's all centered around the Federal Reserve. This is why we don't just need an audit of the Federal Reserve. We need to abolish it. It is the biggest focal point of risk. I mean, the Federal Reserve does stress tests on banks, which are basically just owned by the Department of Justice now. And the U.S. taxpayers bailed them out, but now it's just implicitly a zombie bank owned by the federal government. No wonder they're doing so well now. I mean, they've got complete liquidity backed by the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve. But it's the Federal Reserve that inherently is the problem. I mean, they do a stress test on banks. Why aren't we doing a stress test on the Federal Reserve? But you see, what's different about the Federal Reserve is they can print money out of thin air. There is never a liquidity problem, but there can be a faith problem. There can be a trust problem. What does it say on a dollar bill? On God we trust. Backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. Well, people don't believe that anymore. If all the countries jumping ship, moving to the AIIB, no longer believe that, then we've got a serious problem. And it's why I don't think that America will take this lightly. I always call it the spoiled little rich kid that's really undeserving of its wealth, at least at this point in history, because it's based on a Ponzi scheme and easy money policies and 0% interest rates. I mean, look at the financing being done by Wall Street right now, and major, Fortune 500 companies buying back shares at 0%. They're able to finance at 0% and these easy money policies to buy back their own shares and create even loftier and loftier valuations. All of this is centered around the Federal Reserve System. And America is not going to let this shift happen lightly. It's why the reset button, in my opinion, is war. And it's not a little itty-bitty war. It's not another war like we've seen in the Middle East. It'll be a world conflict. It will be a world war, similar to what we experienced during World War II, or World War I, or any other major world event that we've seen in history, because there is always a reversion to the mean. And whether or not it happens this month, next month, 12 months from now, a few years from now, it's going to happen, and it'll have profound implications. It's time for a change, folks. Again, we can have that revolution with Rand Paul as president. We can have that revolution with Hillary Clinton as president. We can have that revolution without any president. But the time to understand that the change is not just ahead of us, but is actually taking place right now. We are living through the moment in history today. I'm Christopher Green. Get this video out everywhere, make it viral, hard hitting it in your face, and click the link below to support our sponsor.